Hey guys, tonight we wander back into the dust and bronze of the ancient world, where one small act of pettiness spirals into a decade-long disaster. You settle in, eyes heavy, as I paint the scene. Mount Olympus shimmering in the sun, gods lounging like reality show contestants who never quite learn to share. There's a wedding going on, Peleus the mortal marrying Thetis the sea nymph, and all the deities are invited, all except one. Poor Eris, goddess of discord, left off the guest list because, well, who wants chaos at their party? Of course, Eris shows up anyway, clutching a shiny golden apple inscribed with the words, "For the fairest." You know that moment in family dinners when someone asks who mom's favorite really is? Same vibe, but cosmic. Hera, queen of the gods, snatches at it. Aphrodite, goddess of love, bats her lashes. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, crosses her arms like she's been preparing for this debate forever. None of them will back down. The atmosphere gets so tense you can practically hear someone muttering, "You probably won't survive this wedding reception." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world everyone is drifting off to sleep from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The squabble can't be settled on Olympus. Zeus, ever the master of dodging responsibility, refuses to choose between the three goddesses. Imagine your boss asking you to decide which coworkers deserve a raise. You'd suddenly develop urgent business elsewhere, too. Instead, Zeus points to a mortal shepherd prince named Paris of Troy, lounging out in the fields, blissfully unaware that the universe is about to dump its drama into his lap. Paris is handsome, thoughtful, and has a knack for avoiding heavy lifting. Perfect candidate. The three goddesses descend, each offering bribes to sway him. Hera promises power and political dominion over Asia. Athena dangles wisdom and battlefield glory, but Aphrodite plays the ace. She offers the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Now, historians still argue whether Paris actually had any real choice here, or if it was like being offered a coupon for free pizza versus free eternal taxes. Unsurprisingly, Paris hands the golden apple to Aphrodite. That single decision shifts the entire course of history, or at least mythology. Hera fumes, Athena seethes, Aphrodite smiles with the self-satisfaction of someone who's just secured front-row seats to the apocalypse. Down on Earth, Helen is already married to King Menelaus of Sparta, but gods have never let minor details like marriage vows get in the way of a good plot twist. Here's your mainstream fact. Homer's Iliad doesn't actually start with the apple or the abduction. It plunges us years into the war. All this backstory came from later epics and storytellers patching together the bigger mythic universe. But it's so juicy, you can't fall asleep without it. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some versions say the golden apple wasn't even gold, but made of regular fruit coated in divine honey glaze. Imagine losing 10 years of your life because of celestial dessert. As Paris pockets Aphrodite's promise, he sets a chain in motion. Soon, he'll travel to Sparta, charm Helen, and spark the most infamous love story turned tragedy of antiquity. But for now, he just sits in the meadow, sheep bleating softly, and no idea that all of Troy's walls, towers, and lives depend on his next steps. The gods recline above, playing out their rivalries like chess with human pawns, and you, drifting deeper into the soft shadows of this tale, already can sense the slow pull of fate. The apple glitters, the air cools, and somewhere in the distance, sails are being readied, not yet unfurled, but waiting.
You drift deeper into the haze, where Menelaus's outrage ripples outward like a pebble tossed in a still pond. The abduction of Helen isn't just a personal insult. It's an earthquake rattling the fragile balance among kings. Menelaus rushes to his brother Agamemnon, the stern and ambitious ruler of Mycenae, whose palace gleams with gold and whose ambitions stretch beyond his borders. Agamemnon, never one to resist flexing his authority, sees opportunity in his brother's misfortune. Revenge will come, yes, but so will glory, power, and the chance to command the greatest war host Greece has ever seen. You can almost hear the clamor of messengers riding out, hooves pounding dusty roads as they summon heroes bound by oaths. Years earlier, before Helen's marriage, her many suitors had sworn to defend her chosen husband, whoever he might be. It was a clever ploy by her father Tyndareus, and now the old promise is dusted off and enforced. Imagine signing up for a sweepstakes and then, 10 years later, being told you owe 10 years of military service. One by one, the leaders gather. Odysseus of Ithaca, wily and reluctant, tries to fake madness by plowing his fields with salt. But the recruiters see through the ruse, tossing his infant son in front of the plow. Odysseus swerves to avoid him, his sanity revealed. You picture him muttering under his breath, realizing he's just been drafted into a decade-long nightmare. Then there's Achilles, the golden-haired warrior destined for either a long, quiet life or eternal glory with an early grave. His mother, Thetis, hides him among maidens on the island of Skyros, dressing him in women's clothing. Yet the ruse collapses when Odysseus lays out weapons among gifts, and Achilles instinctively grabs the sword. Historians still argue whether this disguise was Thetis's desperate attempt to save him or just another colorful myth patched into the saga. Either way, you sense Achilles' fate tightening like a noose. Mainstream fact. The Greek world was a patchwork of small kingdoms, but this war story imagines them uniting under one massive coalition, an echo of later Greek ideals about pan-Hellenic identity. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient storytellers claimed the Greeks gathered over 1,000 ships, while others put the number closer to a few hundred. One later commentator even joked it was more like 100 dinghies with bad sails. You can almost hear the ancient equivalent of internet debates arguing ship counts in comment threads. As the kings assemble, the air fills with anticipation. Nestor, the wise old counselor, smooths rivalries. Ajax the Greater looms like a walking fortress, while Ajax the Lesser scowls, already overshadowed by his namesake. Diomedes sharpens his blade, eager to prove himself, and Menelaus fumes, vowing to reclaim Helen. Each man sees his own motives reflected in the coming storm. You trail along as the ships are fitted, timbers creaking, sails stitched tight. Black hulls line the beaches like teeth in a jaw. Torches flicker at night as soldiers sing, drink, and whisper of the glories to come. The sea itself seems to lean closer, restless for the burden it will soon carry. And in the distance, Troy rises on its hill, towers gleaming in the Anatolian sun, utterly unaware that an army of kings is preparing to knock at its gates. For now, the city sleeps, Helen settling into her new role as Trojan queen, while beyond the horizon, an entire world gathers in her name. You breathe slower, the steady rhythm of waves against hulls lulling you. The oaths are recalled, the heroes are summoned, and you feel the collective weight of destiny pressing like a tide. Soon the ships will move. Soon the war will spill onto Troy's shores. But for now, you rest with the army in its rising anticipation, caught between silence and thunder. The shoreline blurs before your eyes, filled with the dark silhouettes of ships waiting like restless animals. The kings are gathered, the warriors eager, yet the gods are never quite ready to let mortals sail without exacting their toll. You step into the scene at Aulis, a wind-swept harbor where the Greek fleet is held captive by still waters and mocking breezes. The ships creak against the sand, sails slack, men restless. It feels like a picnic that's gone stale, wineskins drained, tempers rising. Agamemnon, commander of this uneasy coalition, fumbles when it matters most. He kills a sacred deer, perhaps carelessly, perhaps arrogantly, and the goddess Artemis takes offense. Winds vanish, the sea sulks in stubborn calm. Imagine standing with thousands of warriors staring at you, grumbling, "Well, boss, now what?" Agamemnon turns pale, knowing the gods don't let insults slide. Mainstream fact: ancient armies believed divine favor was essential. Battles weren't won by bronze alone. Omens, sacrifices, and rituals underpinned every campaign. Without the gods, even the largest host would falter. So, the priests consult the oracles. The verdict chills the camp. Only a great sacrifice will appease Artemis. Not a bull, not a flock of sheep, but Agamemnon's own daughter, Iphigenia. Picture the silence that follows, the men shifting uncomfortably, Achilles glaring, Odysseus avoiding eye contact, and Agamemnon swallowing hard. It's the kind of family drama that makes even the most awkward Thanksgiving dinner look tame. Quirky tidbit. Some versions say Artemis spares the girl at the last second, whisking her away and leaving a deer on the altar. Others say no, she dies, her blood spilled to fill the sails. Historians still argue whether this reflects real sacrificial traditions or just another myth layered with moral discomfort. Either way, you sense the fleet sailing soon after, as though the winds themselves inhale her spirit. You watch as the sails billow at last, white against a blue expanse. The men cheer, the oars dip in rhythm, and the coastline shrinks. The journey has begun. Salt spray cools your cheeks, and seabirds wheel overhead. But the sea is never fully peaceful. Storms rise. At one point, the Greeks are blown off course to Mysia, clashing with locals who fight ferociously. Even when they regroup, the fleet is plagued by quarrels and delays. War has not yet touched Troy, but already blood is spilled, already omens whisper of the ruin to come. Through the nights at sea, you hear the soldiers telling stories, jokes about Achilles' temper, grumbles about Odysseus' clever tricks, whispers about Helen's beauty. 1,000 men, 1,000 reasons for fighting. Some dream of glory, others just want loot, and a few probably just wanted a vacation from farming. You smile drowsily at the thought. Nothing has changed much in human ambition. The prow cuts across the waves, carrying the weight of oath and pride. Far ahead, Troy's coast waits, a city that has never fallen, where tall walls and watchful eyes soon will measure the worth of this armada. The war drums aren't beating yet, but you can feel them, faint in your pulse, steady as your breath. The fleet is moving, destiny sliding closer with each oar stroke, each gust of wind.
You sway with the rhythm of the waves as the fleet, black-hulled and creaking, finally touches Trojan sand. Imagine the hush before a storm. Seagulls shriek overhead, sails collapse in folds of canvas, and warriors step off ships that smell of salt, sweat, and cramped quarters. Your sandals crunch against the unfamiliar shore, the smell of pine and smoke drifting from nearby villages. For years, people will say, this is the moment history shuddered, though at first it's just a scramble of soldiers trying not to trip on wet rocks. The first clash doesn't happen against Troy's walls. The Greeks raid smaller towns along the coast, testing their strength, taking supplies, flexing their bronze muscles. In one version, Achilles leads the first skirmishes, cutting down Trojans and allies alike, already building a reputation that sends whispers through the camps. You feel the sting of his pride in the air, like heat before lightning. Mainstream fact: archaeological evidence shows Troy was a wealthy hub controlling trade routes. Whoever held it commanded a gateway between the Aegean and the Black Sea. That's one reason later scholars suggest the war may have been less about Helen and more about economics, though no one sings lullabies about tariffs. Quirky tidbit: some stories claim that as soon as the Greeks landed, Protesilaus, the first to leap ashore, was also the first to die, fulfilling a prophecy that the earliest Greek to touch Trojan soil would fall. His wife, Laodomia, supposedly sculpted a bronze likeness of him to keep in her chamber. Historians still argue whether this reflects a real custom of heroic cults or just poetic embellishment. Either way, you picture her whispering to cold metal each night, a kind of ancient long-distance call. The Trojans rush to meet the invaders, led by Hector, Prince of Troy, his armor flashing in the sun. The clash is sharp and brief, more probing than decisive. Spears fly, shields ring, dust rises. You slip between the fighters, feeling the vibration of bronze on bronze, the smell of iron, and the chaotic swirl of gods tugging strings invisibly. Aphrodite shields Paris when he stumbles, while Apollo guides Trojan arrows. The battlefield feels like a puppet stage, and you, half dreaming, can almost see the gods' hands twitching above. But the Greeks do not break. They carve out a foothold and set up camp by the shore, building huts, digging trenches, preparing for a long haul. Fires glow at night, meat roasting, songs echoing across the sea. The war has begun, not as a sudden inferno, but as a slow burn, a siege destined to drag on. You linger in the quiet between battles. The surf washes steadily, the camp murmurs with laughter and argument, and you sense the uneasy mix of boredom and dread. Already soldiers mutter about how long this will take, about prophecies that say Troy cannot fall without Achilles, without Heracles' bow, without tricks still waiting to be imagined. The war stretches ahead like an endless road. Your eyelids sag as the images soften, torchlight flickering on helmets, the faint clatter of dice on wooden boards, and the stars wheeling silently above a shoreline bristling with ships. The Greeks are here to stay, and Troy, shimmering on its hill, begins to realize the weight of the siege pressing close. The camp by the shore turns into a small city of its own. Rows of huts stretch back from the waterline, trenches mark the borders, and black ships are drawn up like walls of wood. You walk among the men as the early fire of battle cools into something slower, more grinding. Years pass in the dust and salt air. The siege does not end quickly, and Troy's walls, tall and stubborn, loom just beyond reach. By day, the armies clash in bursts, raids, duels, shouts echoing off the plain. By night, fires burn and the endless waiting gnaws. This isn't the glorious whirlwind the poets promised. It's long stretches of boredom, broken by sudden flashes of terror. You can almost hear the grumble of soldiers tired of stale bread and smoky fires, muttering jokes about how they signed up for Helen and got 10 years of mosquitoes instead. Mainstream fact: the Iliad covers only a few weeks in the final year of the war, but other epics and fragments fill in the long stalemate. Raids on neighboring towns, Trojan allies arriving, heroes trading victories and losses. The real timeline is more of a patchwork than a single narrative. One quirky tidbit: Storytellers claim that the Greeks even fought over who got the best cuts of meat at camp feasts. Imagine Ajax the Greater, towering like a mountain, bickering about a lamb shank. Historians still argue whether such details reflect genuine memories of Bronze Age warrior culture or just later writers poking fun at heroes. Either way, the absurdity keeps the camp alive. The gods meddle constantly. You feel it in the air. Aphrodite shielding her favorites, Athena pushing Greeks into reckless charges, Apollo guiding Trojan arrows. The battlefield feels like a puppet stage, and you, half dreaming, can almost see the gods' hands twitching above. Inside Troy, life continues in eerie parallel. Priam rules with weary dignity. His sons defend the gates. Women weave and pray. Children grow up never knowing peace. At night, you hear the lull of lyres from within the walls, soft against the crackle of enemy fires outside. Two worlds stare at each other across the plain, both waiting for something to finally break. Among the Greeks, rivalries fester. Agamemnon's pride rubs against Achilles' temper. Odysseus schemes quietly. Menelaus broods, his anger cold and steady. You drift through their tents, catching fragments of whispers, prophecies about the war's length, rumors of heroes fated to die, uneasy laughter around dice games. The tension coils tighter each year, like a bowstring waiting to snap. And always, the sea murmurs against the shore, steady and indifferent. The ships creak in the tide, the stars hang over the plain, and the men wonder how long the gods will keep them circling, killing, waiting. You breathe with them, slow and heavy, as time itself stretches, war becoming less of a storm and more of a prison.
You feel the air change in the camp, the way heat builds before a storm. Songs around the fires get shorter, laughter thins, and the space between tents tightens with bad temper. It begins with a priest walking through the surf, an old man named Chryses, laurel crown at his brow, lifting his hands to the sky. His daughter has been taken in a raid and awarded to Agamemnon. The priest offers rich ransom and sacred words. Salt clings to his robe the way worry clings to a father. Agamemnon snaps, refuses, threatens, and sends the priest away. You watch Chryses turn back along the wet sand, shoulders small against the long horizon. That night, the god answers. Apollo's plague comes like invisible arrows. The camp fills with cough and fever. Pack animals buckle, and pyres smoke for the wrong reasons. Dawn after dawn the smoke rises, a gray column that makes the sun taste like metal. You breathe it and feel the press of judgment in your chest. At last an assembly is called. Achilles, bright as a blade in sunlight, stands where everyone can see him and says what no one wants to hear. Return the girl, appease the god, stop pretending honor can outrun consequence. Calchas the seer confirms it with a voice like reeds in wind. The crowd's eyes pivot to Agamemnon. He grudges the admission, then tosses a hook into the silence. If he gives up his prize, he will take another, Achilles Briseis. The air goes thin. Pride and power are about to butt heads. Achilles' hand goes to the hilt. For a heartbeat you see the war split in two, Greeks against Trojans, and Greeks against themselves. Then Athena touches Achilles' hair, unseen by the crowd, and a coolness slides through his rage. It's the divine version of your best friend texting at 2 a.m., "Don't send that email." Achilles sheathes the sword, but sharpens his tongue. He says he didn't cross the sea to be robbed by his own commander. Agamemnon answers with the stubbornness of a man allergic to compromise. Mainstream fact. In the epic tradition, Agamemnon returns Chryses' daughter to end Apollo's plague, but immediately sends heralds to seize Briseis from Achilles, who in response withdraws himself and the Myrmidons from battle, an insult that ignites the Iliad's central crisis. The heralds, Talthybius and Eurybates walk to Achilles' hut as if the ground were made of needles. Patroclus meets them gently. Achilles gives the order without theatrics, as if speaking to a wound. Briseis must go. She leaves with one last look over her shoulder, small as a sparrow in the doorway's dark. When the tent is empty, silence takes the room like tidewater. Achilles goes down to the shore, sits in the surf's hiss, and stares at a horizon that refuses to blink. He calls his mother. The sea humps up, and Thetis rises, silver and sorrowing, the kind of mother who has rehearsed bad outcomes for years. Achilles pours out his anger, insult, stolen honor, the sour taste of being used, and you feel the deep unfairness wrinkle the water around his knees. Thetis promises to speak to Zeus, to bend the war away from the Greeks until they remember who kept them safe. It is petty, it is justice, it is both, and the tide does not vote. Zeus hears and nods, a small motion that rattles heaven. Hera sees the nod and sets her jaw. Marital diplomacy on Olympus is basically a never-ending group chat with 12,000 unread messages, but the decision holds. You sense the scale tip. Trojans will rise, Greeks will stumble, all because a king could not keep his appetite on a leash. The camp breathes differently now, a little thinner, as if the wind is turned and started carrying bad news. Quirky tidbit. In quieter hours, Achilles plays a finely carved lyre, singing the famous deeds of men in his tent. Picture the deadliest fighter alive doing a soft midnight set like a sleepy street busker, while Patroclus pretends not to know all the choruses. Even heroes need playlists. With Achilles out, the Greeks test the field and feel it bite. Diomedes shines like a fresh coin. Odysseus knits the lines with wit and grit. Ajax stands like a wall where walls are thin. Yet something vital is missing from the charge, the way a parade feels off without its drumline. The Trojans push harder, buoyed by a sense that gods are finally paying their side some interest. You walk the ramparts with Hector, and his breath carries the city's confidence like a banner. Historians still argue whether Achilles' withdrawal is a petty sulk or a principled stand inside a Bronze Age gift economy where honor, time, is the glue that holds kings and followers together. Was he guarding his pride or protecting the rules that keep leaders from turning into thieves? The debate crackles like coals and will likely outlive every fire on this beach. Night returns. The pyres are fewer now that the plague is past, but the mood has not softened. Someone suggests the camp wellness committee should run a trust-building exercise for Agamemnon and Achilles. Someone else notes it will probably require stationary spears. Weary laughter ripples out, the kind that keeps people from shattering. Even in myth, some meetings could have been emails. Days slide by. The Myrmidons polish armor that won't see daylight, stack spears that won't fly, and perfect the art of deliberate silence. Achilles sits by the sea and lets the horizon file his anger down to a duller edge. He doesn't forgive. Patroclus keeps the tent steady. Food, clean water, a few jokes kept gentle, and matches his friend's breathing as if calming a wounded animal. The huge hinge of the war swings quietly in the space between these two men. Past midnight, the surf hushes the drone of the camp. If you listen, you catch the soft thrum of Achilles' lyre again, a melody moving slow as the tide. The tent walls breathe, a lamp gutters, and Patroclus exhales in his sleep. There is peace here, but it is the kind that lives 1 inch inside a storm. Let your shoulders sink. Things could have ended differently at a dozen turns. If a king were humble, if a hero were less proud, if a god had taken the night off. Instead, everything leans toward the next day when the absence of one man will echo louder than 1,000 shields. You feel the air thicken with dread, as if the whole camp knows a storm is waiting just beyond the canvas of their tents. Achilles remains in his hut, the Myrmidons idle, their polished shields reflecting firelight but never sun.
Without him, the Greek lines buckle. The Trojans, led by Hector, surge forward with Apollo at their side, and suddenly the Greeks are pressed back against their ships, the smell of burning timbers already teasing the edges of the battlefield. Patroclus watches it unfold, his patience running thin. He has always been the softer voice near Achilles, the steadying hand, but he can't stand still anymore, not while men fall, not while the black ships groan under Trojan fire. He steps into Achilles' tent, the lamplight flickering across their faces. You hear the hush between them, Patroclus pleading, Achilles unyielding. And then Patroclus offers something dangerous. Let me wear your armor. Mainstream fact. In Homer's Iliad, Patroclus dons Achilles' armor to lead the Myrmidons into battle, hoping the sight will terrify Trojans and give the Greeks breathing space. It's one of the poem's most pivotal turns. Achilles resists, warns him not to chase glory, not to storm Troy itself. Just push them back from the ships, he says. Return before the tide turns. Achilles' pride keeps him from rejoining the fight, but love, for his friend, for his men, forces a compromise. The armor passes from one pair of shoulders to another, bronze cold and heavy. You can almost hear the clink of greaves, the scrape of straps, the helmet swallowing Patroclus's features until he looks like the great warrior himself. Quirky tidbit, some later writers claimed the Myrmidons were so convinced by the disguise that they cheered louder than ever, convinced Achilles had rejoined them. A few probably realized the truth but decided not to ruin the vibe. Historians still argue whether this moment was meant to highlight Patroclus's courage or Achilles' stubborn absence. The Myrmidons thunder out of camp, and for a heartbeat, the Trojans falter. Dust swirls, spears fly, men scatter before what looks like Achilles' wrath returned. The Greeks roar with relief, pushing forward, the ship safe for now. Patroclus cuts down warrior after warrior, his hands sure, his heart aflame. In this moment, he is no longer the gentle shadow behind Achilles. He is light, fury, and flame. But flame burns fast. You watch him drive deeper than he should, chasing Trojans all the way to the gates of Troy. Apollo sees him, strikes him from behind with an unseen hand, and Patroclus staggers, vision swimming. His armor suddenly feels loose, his limbs heavy. A spear from Euphorbus pierces him, and then Hector finishes the work, bronze flashing, the dust swallowing Patroclus whole. The battlefield freezes. For a heartbeat you could hear a pin drop, if pins existed here. Then the clamor resumes, Trojans.
You are there when the news hits him. The camp buzz fades, the shore wind pauses, and Achilles hears the words no one can soften. Patroclus is gone. It isn't a cry so much as the sea itself breaking. He claws dirt and pours it over his head, as if earth could weigh down grief that keeps trying to float away. The old sulk, the clever insults, the careful distance from battle, burned off in a breath. What's left is sharp, simple, and terrifyingly focused. Menelaus and Ajax guard the body like pillars, beating back hands that would strip the fallen. You move with them as they haul Patroclus through the crush, shields locked, breath ragged. Behind you, Hector stands over the empty shell of Achilles' armor, his prize, and the irony bites. The thing that gave Patroclus courage has become a trophy for the man who struck him down. At the hut, the camp goes quiet as snowfall. Achilles kneels, touches the still wrist, and the world narrows to the size of that unmoving pulse. He calls his mother. The sea lifts, and Thetis rises, silver, sorrowing, every mother who has rehearsed bad outcomes. She cannot undo what's happened, but she can arm what comes next. Wait, she tells him, voice ticking like a tide clock. Do not fight until I return. Then she sinks, and the sound is a door clicking shut far underwater. Mainstream fact,
the god Hephaestus forges new armor for Achilles: breastplate, greaves, a cresting helmet, and the famous shield whose surface holds a hammered world. Cities at peace and at war, vineyards and harvest fields, constellations, rivers, a dancing floor that seems to ring if you listen hard. Homer lingers here as if the poem itself inhales before plunging back into blood and dust. The shield is an artwork nested inside the story, a reminder of everything worth saving. While the smith god works, the living make terms. A messenger rushes to Agamemnon. The two men, who lately couldn't share a sentence without barbs, stand facing the same absence. Odysseus referees like a patient HR manager who has outlawed spears in conference rooms. Agamemnon blames Ate, divine delusion, the mythic version of "I was having a day." Achilles says keep the gifts, he wants the field. The camp exhales, the old quarrel draining away like bad wine into the sand. It isn't forgiveness, it's triage. Quirky tidbit: Achilles' immortal horses are named Xanthus and Balius, Blondie and Dapple. Hera lets one speak for a heartbeat to warn him he won't come home. Imagine tightening your sandal straps and your horse mutters, "Buddy, today's complicated." Even heroes don't expect their ride to deliver spoilers. Thetis returns with the gear, and Dawn suddenly looks underdressed. The helmet's crest snags sunlight. The greaves whisper like old friends as the straps pull tight. News ripples across the plain. Achilles has rearmed. Trojans feel it first in their stomachs, a hollowing, and then in their feet as they shift backward a half step they didn't mean to take. Up on the wall, Hector rolls his shoulders the way someone does before a race he never asked to run. Before the charge, Achilles gathers the Myrmidons. He swears he will neither eat nor drink until Patroclus is avenged, and you recognize the ritual edge of that promise, the way fasting can sharpen grief into vow. The men harden like cooled bronze. Somewhere, a junior officer starts drafting safety protocols for unleashed demigods, and then very wisely deletes the memo. Some situations outgrow paperwork. He takes the field. The air changes temperature. Dust leaps to meet him. Trojans scatter and clump like starlings, beautiful in panic. Achilles isn't chasing glitter now. He does something quieter and more frightening. He works. You keep pace at his shoulder as he threads the press, precise, unsparing. Names rise and fall like beads on a string. He cuts the string. He finds Leocaon, once captured, once spared, and the reunion is not sweet. Twice, he says, almost weary, and ends the question himself. Mercy is over for the day. The surge rolls from ships to trenches to open plain. Every time someone tries to stand, you see the small calculations in Achilles' eyes. Line, angle, breath, step. Then the calculation becomes a result. Greek shouting thickens behind him. The sea breeze seems to borrow his lungs. The old missing drumline you felt while he sulked, it's back, steady as a heartbeat. The river objects. Scamander, or Xanthus to friends, has opinions about being used as a weapons bin and laundry for bronze. Corpses choke his eddies. He rears in protest, a fresh water god with an excellent argument. Current coils around Achilles' knees, then waist, tugging to fold him into silence. You feel the pull at your own ankles, the cold urge to sweep everything back to the sea. For a strange comic blink, it's a man wrestling a river, and then Herod dispatches Hephaestus again, this time with fire. Flame licks the banks, drinks the puddles, drives back the flood. The river hisses, grieves, yields. Historians still argue whether this fantastical episode preserves a memory of real flooding in the Troas, poets dressing a natural hazard as a god, or simply dramatizes that even nature bends under Achilles' rage. Either way, the banks steam and he walks on, mud falling from his shins like old doubt. He turns toward the city. The Trojans flee, some to the gates, some sideways to altars.
some into the thought that tomorrow will be kinder. He spots Polydorus, Priam's swift young son, and brings him down. He meets Aeneas, and the gods tug the Trojan hero away by the belt, murmuring, "Not your time." Aeneas will matter later, in other poets, other empires. Achilles lets the future pass. Your breath has synced with his, short, sure, dangerous. Behind you, Greeks surge, ships are safe, odds flip like a shield in sunlight. Even Agamemnon stands a little taller, as if proximity to competence improves posture. Someone claims morale is up 300% according to absolutely no data, and a few men laugh the relieved laugh of people who might actually see sunrise. Through it all, Patroclus lies washed and anointed in the tent, hands folding grief into order. Achilles keeps glancing that way even when he faces the wall, as if his rage were a tether running back to a friend's still shoulder. The path has narrowed, only forward now. No committee meetings, no time for elegant apologies. Just the plain, the gate, and the man who holds the city's heartbeat in his throat. He spots Hector at last, bright helm flashing above the tide of retreat. Trojan and Greek thin away, understanding some moments are too large to share. Achilles lifts the world-bright shield, and for a breath the whole war balances on one hinge. Two men, a city between them, a friendship behind. The wind slides down from the wall, dust lifts, a gull wheels and thinks better of it. You stand very still. Not yet. First, one last chase, one last circle around the city's high crown. Footsteps beating out a rhythm that might be fear, might be fate. Watchmen lean, Priam's fingers knot the parapet. Andromache gathers the child and listens to a silence that feels too loud. Achilles does not tire. Hector does not turn away. Night has not decided to fall. Not yet. Let your shoulders drop. The air tastes of bronze and salt, but underneath it is something softer. Olive wood, oiled leather, horses breathing. Tomorrow, or the next slice of this same forever evening, the two will meet. For now you stand at the lip of decision with everyone else, feeling how the entire war narrows to a single point of bright sound. You follow as the chase tightens, a circle around Troy's tall walls that feels endless yet draws inevitably inward. Dust clouds rise beneath Hector's heels, and behind him the thunder of Achilles is steady, unrelenting like a storm that has chosen one tree to strike. Around and around they run, 3 times the city's crown, while men on the ramparts lean forward, straining as though their eyes could tip the balance. Priam, gray-bearded, clasps the battlements with knotted hands. Andromache clutches her child, already hearing echoes of a widow's lament in the rhythm of those pounding feet. The gods whisper from above. Some favor flight, some urge fight. Athena, sly and firm, descends in disguise as Hector's brother Deiphobus, promising aid. "Turn and stand," she says. "I will fight with you." Hector's lungs burn, but her words cool the fire enough for him to stop. He plants his feet, dust swirling. You can almost feel the relief in his legs, the terror in his chest. Mainstream fact, Homer's Iliad sets this duel at the climax of its arc, not with Helen's abduction nor the horse, but with this meeting of two warriors whose fates mirror and oppose. It is not just a fight, it is the stripping of Troy's last hope. Hector raises his voice, suggesting terms. Whoever wins should return the loser's body for proper burial.
The camp is quiet now, the clamor of Hector's fall echoing into uneasy silence. You walk among the ships, where fires burn low and men speak in hushed tones, as if too much noise might stir the gods into more mischief. Hector lies dishonored outside, dragged and battered, while Patroclus waits inside a tent, his body washed and dressed, garlanded with grief. 2 figures, 2 fates, bound together in death, yet treated so differently. Achilles does not rest. He paces, armor glinting in the torchlight, rage still sparking in his chest. He has avenged Patroclus, yet finds no peace. The absence gapes wider, and the thought of burial for his friend presses harder. He summons the Greeks, calls them to honor Patroclus with funeral rites and games, rituals that bind the living together when grief would tear them apart. Mainstream fact: funeral games were a standard feature of Greek heroic culture, reflecting both honor for the dead and competition among the living. Homer describes contests in running, boxing, wrestling, discus, and chariot racing, rituals that bridged mourning with celebration of life's vigor. The body of Patroclus is laid on a pyre, the flames consuming but also sanctifying. You feel the heat on your skin, the scent of burning wood and oil, the crackle that carries both sorrow and release. Achilles cuts a lock of his own hair and offers it to the flames, a gesture of intimacy no victory can replace. Around him, the Greeks stand silent, each man remembering not just Patroclus, but his own fragile tether to the living. Then the games begin. You see chariots lined up, wheels ready to screech against dust, drivers tense. The race thunders forward, dust spiraling as the horses strain and men shout. Ajax wrestles Odysseus, their muscles glistening under the sun, both refusing to yield until exhaustion forces a draw. Spears fly in contests of aim, fists collide in boxing matches so brutal you can almost hear ribs groan. Each victory honors Patroclus, each contest a reminder that life still moves even as one of its brightest lights has dimmed. Quirky tidbit: Homer takes a whole book to describe these games, lingering on the drama of who cheats, who argues, who almost crashes his chariot. One commentator quipped that it feels like the first sports broadcast in literature. Historians still argue whether these vivid details reflect real athletic traditions of the Bronze Age or are simply Homer projecting the sports of his own time into the heroic past. As the games wind down, the Greeks distribute prizes: tripods, cauldrons, horses, women, and armor, all the strange currency of their world. Some competitors grumble about fairness, others boast, but all agree that Patroclus has been honored. The laughter, however forced, soothes the camp like a bandage over a deep wound. For one day, rivalry replaces grief. Achilles, though, never leaves the pyre long. He returns again and again, circling like a restless shadow, whispering promises to his lost friend. Even at night, while the camp dozes, he drags Hector's body in the dust outside the walls, fury still gnawing where solace should be. Your eyes grow heavy with the smoke, the rhythm of contests, the low murmur of warriors trying to live while loss presses in. The games end, the embers fade, and the camp returns to its uneasy vigil. Yet the image lingers, a pyre blazing against the sky, a friend's memory lifted higher than the flames, and a hero pacing in the dark, still chained to grief. The smoke from Patroclus's pyre drifts for days, curling into the sea breeze until it feels as if all Troy and the Greek camp are breathing grief together. Yet inside the Trojan walls, despair hardens. Instead of softening, Hector is gone, and with him the city's strongest shield. Priam moves like a man carrying too many winters, while the women of Troy weave black into their garments. Even the children feel the weight, play muffled, laughter thinner, as though joy itself knows it shouldn't be loud. But Troy doesn't collapse. It waits. The Trojans turn to allies, summoning kings and princes from neighboring lands. From Thrace comes Rhesus, with his bright, miraculous horses said to be swifter than the wind. From the Amazon lands rides Penthesilea, tall and fierce, her spear gleaming like new moonlight. Even Memnon, son of the dawn goddess, marches in with Ethiopian warriors whose armor glows darkly in the sun. Each new arrival stirs hope, a reminder that Troy does not stand alone. Mainstream fact: later epics beyond Homer's Iliad especially the so-called epic cycle, expanded the war's roster with these allies, filling out the decade with new heroes. The core poem ends before they appear, but their legends stuck, embroidered into the larger myth like extra threads on a vast tapestry. Achilles meets them all, and each duel is its own miniature tragedy. Rhesus falls before his horses ever drink from the Scamander, ambushed in the night by Odysseus and Diomedes. Penthesilea charges into the Greek line with her Amazons, cutting men down until Achilles' spear stops her. When her helmet falls, revealing her face, the hero's heart stutters with regret at her beauty. Too late, too cruel. Quirky tidbit, one ancient commentator claimed another Greek, Thersites, mocked Achilles for falling in love with the woman he'd just killed, earning himself a swift punch that broke his skull. Historians still argue whether this episode reflects authentic tradition or later gossip about Achilles' complicated mix of desire and rage. Then comes Memnon, radiant in dawn's glow, his armor forged by Hephaestus like Achilles' own. Their duel shakes the plain, spear against spear, shield against shield, until Memnon finally falls and the goddess Eos weeps for her son. Her tears, they say, became the morning dew, tiny jewels on the grass that still greet you each day, whether you notice them or not. Inside Troy, hope flickers and fades with each loss. The people glance at omens, prophecies circling like crows. The city cannot fall while Hector lives, yet Hector is gone. The city cannot fall unless the wooden relic of Heracles is brought against it, unless Achilles himself dies, unless cunning finds a door there is none. These prophecies weigh like riddles, each answer darker than the last. Historians still argue whether such prophecies reflect real Bronze Age divination practices or are simply narrative glue to stretch the war into a 10-year saga. Whatever the truth, they remind you that Troy was always living on borrowed time. Night after night, the city hears the distant songs of the Greek camp, sometimes laughter, sometimes funeral wails, sometimes the eerie hum of Achilles' lyre. Within the walls, the Trojans keep their own vigils, singing softer, praying harder, wishing for dawns that bring good news instead of more ashes. You breathe slowly with them, imagining the quiet streets, the torch-lit temples, the restless dreams. Troy does not fall yet, but despair threads its way into every stone. Each ally lost, each prophecy whispered, each omen ignored, like cracks creeping unseen through a wall that still stands, but only just. But thank you for listening to the story of Troy.
The night is heavy with smoke and whispers. The Trojans, weary from funerals and omens, finally see the Greek camp strangely silent. Fires burn low, ships rest in shadow, and the plain, once alive with clashing bronze, feels empty. You drift along the ramparts, where watchmen peer into the dark, uncertain. Then their eyes catch it, a massive wooden shape left on the sand, towering, alien, wheels sunk deep in dust. It gleams faintly in moonlight, a horse, huge, hollow, improbable. The Greeks, it seems, have sailed away, leaving only this strange monument. The Trojans pour from the gates at dawn, astonished. They circle the horse, touching its smooth sides, marveling at the joinery. Was it an offering to Athena, a surrender gift, or a trick? The questions ripple like wind through wheat. Mainstream fact: the story of the Trojan horse isn't in Homer's Iliad at all. It appears in later epics and in Virgil's Aeneid. Homer ends before Troy falls. The horse became the iconic symbol later, stitched into the myth until no one could separate it from the whole tapestry. Laocoon, a Trojan priest, warns against it, hurling his spear into the wood. The sound inside rings hollow, a thud like a heartbeat muffled by ribs. You feel the vibration in your chest, and for a moment the truth teeters on the edge of revelation. But fate has a way of silencing wisdom. That very day, 2 serpents rise from the sea, slithering through surf and sand, coiling around Laocoon and his sons. The city watches in horror as they are crushed, drowned in coils, dragged beneath the waves. The omen is clear, or so they believe. Athena is angry, and the horse must be sacred. Quirky tidbit. Some later versions suggested the serpents weren't divine punishment, but just very unlucky timing. Giant sea snakes wandering by at the worst possible moment. Historians still argue whether this reflects an older local myth grafted into the horse story, or just the ancient equivalent of narrative special effects. That night, the horse is dragged through Troy's gates with ropes and cheers. Children run beside it, laughing, while elders shake their heads but do not stop the crowd. The wheels grind over stone, sparks flying, the wooden belly creaking with secrets. You know, of course, what waits inside. Odysseus, Menelaus, Diomedes, and others crouched in silence, hearts pounding like war drums muffled by pine. Troy feasts, celebrating what seems to be victory at last. Wine spill, music soars, torches flare. You walk the streets with them, but your steps feel heavier, knowing the night will not end with song. Above, stars blink indifferently, the same stars that shone when Paris first set sail with Helen, as if all of this were just one long, preordained evening. Historians still argue whether the horse symbolizes an actual siege engine, a disguised battering ram, or even a memory of an earthquake, the horse of Poseidon, that breached the city's defenses. Whatever the origin, the story survived because it carried the perfect weight of irony. A city undone not by strength, but by misplaced trust. As the Trojans sleep, the gates locked, the horse waits in the moonlight's hush. The hollow belly stirs with breath and sweat, warriors cramped in silence. Somewhere, Sinon, the Greek left behind to sell the story, smiles in the dark, his lies having worked better than any spear. You feel your own breath slow as the city slumbers, unaware that history is about to tip. The horse stands tall in the square, wooden flanks groaning softly, while Troy dreams its last unbroken dream. The city sleeps, lulled by wine and the illusion of peace. Torches gutter in the streets, musicians have laid down their lyres, and the night air hums with that rare stillness after celebration. You drift with the hush until the first creak of wood breaks it, the belly of the horse stirring, its timbers sighing like an old door. From inside, warriors slip out one by one, armor muted with cloth, blades glinting faintly in starlight. Odysseus first, eyes sharp, movements precise, then Menelaus, Diomedes, and the others who have hidden in silence for hours that felt like years. They pad through the alleys, shadows among shadows, until they reach the gates. There they signal with a torch. Beyond the walls, the Greek fleet, never gone, only hiding behind the island of Tenedos, catches the sign. Oars dip soundlessly, black ships glide forward, and the sea delivers its vengeance back to the shore. Mainstream fact. Virgil's Aeneid gives the most famous version of this fall, describing how the Greeks pour from the horse and throw open the gates while their fleet returns under cover of night. The story became the definitive image of Troy's destruction, etched into Western imagination as a warning against trusting gifts. Inside the city, the Greeks fan out. Torches flare, doors splinter, and the music of war, clashing bronze, screams, the crackle of fire swells into the streets. Priam's palace is stormed, the old king butchered at his own altar, a sight so brutal even the gods turn away. Andromache is dragged from her chambers, her child Astyanax ripped from her arms, fate already written for him in whispers too grim to linger on. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources claimed Helen herself played a role in the night, either signaling to the Greeks with a torch or trying to lure the hidden warriors out by imitating the voices of their wives. Historians still argue whether this twist was an attempt to darken Helen's character or simply to dramatize her role in the inevitable collapse. Flames roar higher, temples crack, statues topple, and the proud towers of Troy dissolve into embers. You walk the streets as if in a dream, feet crunching on broken tile, the smell of cedar beams and flesh mingling in the air. The horse still stands in the square, its hollow belly empty now, the perfect emblem of the trick that undid a city once thought unbreakable. From a side street, you glimpse Aeneas leading a band of survivors, carrying his aged father on his shoulders, his little son clinging to his hand. This fragment of the story will sprout into Rome one day, but tonight it is just a desperate family fleeing fire. Historians still argue whether Troy's destruction mirrors a real late Bronze Age city sacked by sea raiders or rival states, its ruins later embroidered with myth. Archaeology shows the city burned multiple times across centuries, so perhaps the poets blended them into one cataclysm. The night drags on, and by dawn Troy is no more. Smoke stains the sky, the sea laps indifferent against charred beams, and the cries fade into silence. You breathe slowly, as if the ruin itself has exhausted even grief. The walls that withstood a decade fell not to strength, but to cunning, fire, and the restless pride of men who could not walk away.
You step into the ashy dawn after Troy's collapse, where the wind smells of wet timber and the future. The city is finished, yes, but the story keeps walking. Out through the broken gates, down to the shore, onto decks tarred and creaking. Survivors scatter like sparks in a breeze, some Greeks hungry for home, some Trojans hunted, some heroes already learning that victory and safety are not the same thing. You follow the man whose name means trouble wrapped in cleverness, Odysseus, because his road is long and your eyelids are heavy enough to enjoy the scenic route. He orders the sails up, and the oars dip like heartbeat. The sea looks innocent in daylight, which is adorable. Odysseus keeps half his mind on currents and the other half on consequences. The gods have long memories, so do grudges. Before you can settle into the rhythm, you feel the pull of detours that will become legends, a cave that smells of sheep and homicide, a goddess with a voice like warm dusk who pours out hospitality and transformation in the same cup. Songs that are so beautiful you have to tie yourself down just to survive listening. You don't see the sirens, but you hear them in the way the air sweetens as you pass, and you notice the beeswax stuffed in sailors' ears, the Bronze Age version of noise-canceling headphones with much worse branding. Mainstream fact: the ancient Greeks grouped many post-war homecomings under the title nostoi, or returns.
of which Homer's Odyssey is the most famous survivor. Its 10-year voyage home, stacked onto a 10-year war, shaped Western storytelling about journeys for over 2 millennia. Road movies, space sagas, you name it. Meanwhile, other paths knot and fray. Menelaus gathers Helen, yes, the same, still luminous, still divisive, and his route wanders down to Egypt, according to some tellers, where he learns a few things from a shape-shifting sea god and invents the first "we got delayed, long story" excuse in marital history. Agamemnon sails to a home full of shadows, where his wife Clytemnestra has perfected the art of making "welcome back" sound like a trapdoor. Nestor returns smoothly, because of course he does. He's the guy who brings extra blankets and checks the weather twice. Ajax the Lesser, swollen with pride, learns that ignoring Athena after you desecrate her altar is not a best practice. The sea lifts him up and tosses him down. A rock gets a new name. Quirky tidbit: one late tradition says the ghost of Achilles demanded the Greeks sacrifice Polyxena, Priam's daughter, at his tomb before sailing home. Is that a pious memory, a cruel embellishment, or just the ancient equivalent of gossip that wouldn't die? Historians still argue whether such add-on episodes reflect local cult practices or playwrights turning the volume up for festival crowds. Odysseus keeps going. He loses more than men. He sheds simplicities. The Cyclops episode teaches the price of cleverness when pride signs your name on the wind. Circe teaches that comfort can be a beautifully padded cage. The dead teach that knowledge does not always save you, and sometimes it only clarifies how narrow your path is. Calypso teaches the ache of immortality without change, a lesson you file under "no thank you." When his ship finally splinters and he crawls onto a Phaeacian beach, naked and exhausted, you can feel the tale exhale, briefly. He will still have to reclaim a house overrun by men who mistake patience for consent. He will still have to look his wife in the eyes and make truth sound believable after 20 years of unbelievable things. Married people everywhere nod very slowly. Behind him, the Trojans who survive carry embers to new places. Aeneas hoists his father and leads his household into a different poem, one that will eventually plant Rome beside another river under another set of omens. Andromache learns the long grammar of endurance. Cassandra's clear sight is punished in a world that prefers hopeful lies. The Greek victors discover that some victories sour on the tongue long before the harbor comes in sight. It is nearly funny, in that dry, divine way, the war that was supposed to settle everything turns out to be a stone dropped in a basin with ripples that keep slapping the rim. You walk forward on those ripples. Centuries later, bards still string lyres and sing. Playwrights argue with ghosts in crowded theaters. Kings sponsor new versions of old stories because patronage loves an epic. And students pretend they read the whole thing while carefully quoting the Shield. Far later still, a man with a romantic hat digs at his sarlacc and declares he has found Troy, and though he confuses as much as he clarifies, the dust in his trench tastes like the dust you've been breathing all night. Another fact for your pocket: tablets from the Hittite archives likely mention a place called Wilusa and a people called Ahiawa, names that feel suspiciously like Troy and Achaeans. History and myth keep exchanging business cards. Historians still argue whether there was a single war behind all this song or several sieges telescoped into one, whether the Odyssey encodes real sea routes or the contours of the human mind on a tough year. Maybe the horse was a metaphor, maybe it had wheels, maybe it was an earthquake signature. You are allowed to float in the uncertainty, The story functions beautifully, even when its males are loose. Odysseus will make it home. He will bend his bow, speak his name, count the olive trees, and rest his forehead at last on a familiar table. You feel the harbor as a slow warmth behind the ribs. It does not erase the wreckage. It merely promises a place to breathe between storms. The gods still text at odd hours. Pride still mistakes itself for fate. Apples still glitter when they shouldn't. But for a stretch, there is bread and a lamp, and the sound of someone you love moving in the next room. If you learned anything on these black ships, it's that peace is not a prize, it's a practice. So you ease back from the shoreline of ruins and returns, the sails furled, the oars shipped, the sea smoothing out to a dark sheet where stars can see themselves. The horse is ash, the walls are a lesson, and the long road home is finally a bed. Let the bronze and sparks drift away like embers lifting from a quiet fire, floating higher, smaller, cooler, until even their glow remembers to soften. The shore grows dim, and the noisy decks blur into a low hush. Oars no longer bite the water, and the sea becomes a slow-breathing creature that only rises and falls, as if the whole world is practicing sleep with you. You keep the pieces that help you rest, a sail folding like a blanket, a harbor lamp steady in the dark, sand smoothing itself after footsteps pass. Everything complicated is allowed to unknot itself, a little at a time, and what was jagged now rounds its edges the way pebbles do when the tide has spoken to them for years. Even the tall, stubborn walls remember their old job, to keep out the wind, and they stand only in memory now, just enough to hold a pocket of warm air where you can lie still. Breathe slower. Everything that wanted your attention earlier can wait on the far side of morning. The voices of heroes shrink to friendly murmurs, like neighbors closing doors softly, one by one, down a hallway. Above, constellations keep their patient watch. Below, the keel of a dream slides forward without effort, as if the water itself were carrying you home. If the gods meddle tonight, let it be only in kindness, a small breeze arranging the room, a quiet thought setting down a softer pillow, a calm certainty that the map is simple for now. Here, rest, safe. The apple no longer glitters, the horse is only wood, the sea is only breath. You are already most of the way to sleep, and the last distance is easy, and it is yours.